Beneath the shimmering golden roofs of China's imperial palaces, where jade ornaments caught the morning light and silk tapestries depicted scenes of paradise, lived women whose existence was more prison than privilege. For over 2,000 years, Chinese emperors maintained elaborate households of wives and concubines, creating what historians now recognize as one of humanity's most sophisticated systems of legalized captivity. The Tang dynasty's imperial records, discovered in sealed vaults beneath Xi'an, reveal the horrifying truth behind the facade of luxury. These women lived shorter, more brutal lives than common peasants, despite being surrounded by unimaginable wealth. Emperor Xuanzong of Tang, celebrated in poetry as a romantic figure, actually maintained over 40,000 women in his harem, most of whom he never spoke to, and many of whom died from neglect, suicide, or violence from their competitors. The selection process began when girls, as young as 13, were identified by imperial scouts traveling throughout the empire, chosen not for their happiness or consent, but for their potential to produce male heirs and enhance the emperor's prestige. Families celebrated these selections, unaware they were condemning their daughters to lives of isolation, competition, and psychological torment that would make modern prisoners of war seem fortunate by comparison. The journey to the capital often took months, during which many girls attempted suicide rather than face their fate, leading to the development of elaborate restraint systems disguised as ceremonial transportation. Upon arrival at the imperial city, these young women underwent physical examinations, psychological evaluations, and training programs designed to strip away their individual identities and transform them into interchangeable objects of imperial pleasure. The medical records from the Ming dynasty reveal that over 60% of new arrivals showed signs of severe depression within their first year, and nearly 20% attempted self-harm or suicide. Those who survived the initial adjustment period found themselves trapped in a social structure so complex and dangerous that navigating it required skills that would challenge modern diplomats and corporate executives. The daily existence of imperial wives defied every romantic notion perpetuated by historical fiction and popular media. Morning began at 4 o'clock with mandatory beauty preparations that lasted until noon, supervised by eunuchs who would beat women for minor imperfections in their appearance or deportment. The cosmetic process alone was a form of torture. Faces were painted with lead-based makeup that caused gradual poisoning. Feet were bound so tightly that walking became agony, and hair was arranged with pins and ornaments so heavy that chronic neck and shoulder pain became universal among palace women. Breakfast consisted of carefully measured portions designed to maintain an idealized body weight, with caloric intake monitored so strictly that malnutrition was common even among the highest-ranking wives. The afternoon education sessions required memorization of thousands of pages of court etiquette, classical literature, and sexual techniques, with failure to demonstrate mastery resulting in punishment that ranged from public humiliation to physical abuse. Evening brought the terror of potential imperial summons, where women who had spent years preparing for a single encounter with the emperor might be rejected after 5 minutes for reasons they would never understand. Those not chosen faced nights of anxiety-inducing uncertainty, knowing that their failure to attract imperial attention moved them closer to the forgotten outer quarters where discarded women slowly withered away. The competition for imperial favor created an environment where poisoning rivals became so common that food tasters were assigned to higher-ranking wives, and even then, creative methods of assassination flourished. Historical records document cases of women using infected needles hidden in jewelry, toxic powders mixed into cosmetics, and even trained insects to deliver fatal venoms to their competitors. If you find these glimpses into the reality behind imperial luxury as shocking as they are revealing, stay tuned as we uncover even more disturbing truths about how absolute power created systems of oppression that defied human imagination. The hierarchical structure within imperial harems created psychological warfare that would impress modern intelligence agencies with its sophistication and cruelty. The empress, theoretically the most powerful woman in the empire, actually lived under constant threat from dozens of ambitious concubines, scheming relatives, and political factions seeking to manipulate imperial succession. Historical accounts from the Qing dynasty reveal that Empress Dowager Cixi, one of the few women to achieve real power, survived over 30 documented assassination attempts and ordered the execution of more than 200 rival women during her reign. Below the empress, imperial noble consorts fought desperate battles for recognition that often involved sacrificing their own children to eliminate potential threats from other bloodlines. The ranking system, with its elaborate titles and ceremonial privileges, served primarily to pit women against each other in competitions where winning meant survival and losing meant death, or exile to monastery prisons where former imperial wives spent their final years in silent contemplation of lives destroyed by circumstances beyond their control. The documentation process for daily activities created additional layers of oppression. Every conversation, every meal, every expression of emotion was recorded by teams of literate eunuchs whose reports determined each woman's fate. These surveillance records, preserved in the Forbidden City archives, read like psychiatric case studies documenting the systematic destruction of human personality and the transformation of vibrant young women into hollow shells competing for scraps of attention from men who viewed them as disposable entertainment. The pregnancy protocols reveal perhaps the most disturbing aspects of imperial wife management. Women who successfully conceived faced immediate isolation from all other palace residents, constant monitoring by physician guards, and dietary restrictions, so severe that maternal mortality rates reached nearly 40%. Those who successfully delivered male children found themselves targets for elimination by rival factions, while mothers of daughters often faced exile or execution for their failure to provide valuable heirs. The punishment systems employed within imperial harems demonstrated creativity and cruelty that challenged the limits of human imagination and revealed the depths to which absolute power could corrupt those wielding it. Minor infractions, such as speaking without permission or displaying insufficient enthusiasm during imperial encounters, resulted in graduated responses that began with reduced food rations and progressed through social isolation, assignment, to degrading servant duties and public humiliation ceremonies where other women were forced to participate in their peers' destruction. Moderate offenses, including suspected disloyalty, pregnancy termination, or failure to report suspicious behavior by other wives, triggered more severe consequences. Beatings administered by specially trained female guards, confinement in windowless cells for months at a time, or forced participation in the torture of other prisoners as both punishment and loyalty test. The most serious violations, such as attempting escape, plotting against the emperor, or showing affection for anyone other than the sovereign, led to punishments that pushed beyond the boundaries of human endurance. The imperial executioners, working under direct orders from the emperor himself, developed techniques that maximized suffering while avoiding damage to the victim's outward appearance, ensuring that other wives could witness the consequences of rebellion without being traumatized to the point of complete mental breakdown. These methods included slow poisoning with substances that caused weeks of gradual organ failure, deliberate infection with diseases that created prolonged agony, and psychological torture involving the systematic destruction of everything the victim had ever loved or hoped for. Emperor Qianlong, grandson of Kangxi and considered one of China's greatest rulers, personally designed several torture methods specifically for use on imperial wives who disappointed him, including a technique called silk suffocation, where victims were slowly strangled with their own ceremonial robes over the course of several hours. The records indicate that Qianlong would often observe these punishments while composing poetry, finding inspiration in the suffering of women who had once competed desperately for his attention. The lasting impact of these imperial harem systems extended far beyond the palace walls, shaping Chinese attitudes toward women, marriage, and power for centuries after the dynasties themselves had crumbled into historical memory. The normalization of treating women as expendable commodities in service of male ambition created cultural patterns that influenced everything from arranged marriage practices to modern human trafficking operations that continue plaguing East Asia today. The psychological profiles of emperors, raised by traumatized, competitive mothers, reveal patterns of emotional detachment, sadistic tendencies, and inability to form genuine human connections that contributed directly to the political instability and social unrest that eventually toppled these seemingly invincible dynasties. Share your thoughts on how these historical atrocities continue influencing modern society.